Good morning and welcome to this week's recruitment discussion with Jump. 18 months ago, we ran a webinar with Lead and Gain about opening in the USA. This week, we've got them back and we're going to look at, is the USA still a massive opportunity? If you remember, if you were on that webinar, Alex was in the middle of a hurricane, and this week we're in the middle of the heat wave. So, yeah, good to be there anyway, but as always, if you're watching on YouTube, please subscribe to our channel. We love you for following us. Thanks very much, much appreciated from that. But before we start, as always, some stats. Stat one, the US recruitment market generates $184 billion in 2024. The entire UK sector was 40.6 billion pounds, which is about $51 billion. So the US market's about three or four times the size of the UK. So think there are still less than 25,000 recruitment agents in the US compared to the 35,000, which you're grabbing at the 40 million compared to the 184 million. So it's a lot bigger opportunity for you to work on from there. Stat two, and this is where things will start to sting if you're not already there. International firms. One of the headquarters in the USA, how it works, they've captured $48 billion of the US market. So firms outside the US have now got $48 billion of the US market. That's up from 35 billion the year before. So the US is starting to move massively, and a lot of people are moving into the US. So it's moved from 18% to 23% in 2 years. So somebody's obviously taking a lot of opportunity from there. So the question is, why aren't you? However, there is a warning. So stat three, US medical staffing was fined $9.3 million plus $700,000 in a civil penalty for misclarifying or classifying, should I say, 101,750 social care or healthcare workers. California was also hit with a willful misclassification of $25,000 per violation. So what it says is you've got to get your things right, otherwise things will happen from there. And the final stat is why we're here today. Hourly contract rates in the US often carry gross margins of north of 30%, so well above the UK marketplace. So the market is bigger than ever. It's growing faster than ever. There's less competition. So there's real compliance risk that we've got to look at. But that's what we're going to look at today. So as I said, we've got Alex from Lead and Gain. Lead and Gain is a US based employment of record, servicing international recruitment companies. They allow customers to focus on the recruitment by managing the contractors, onboarding, payment, compliance, timekeeping, benefits, taxes, and legal contracts for recruitment agencies across the US and across Canada from there. So they take away the administration burden, basically, working on all that sort of front. So, Alex, welcome back. Good to see you again.
Thanks, Howard.
So I think the question is let's just kick straight in with the first question and see what happens from there. Because I think there's a lot of questions that we're going to ask, and there's a lot of questions that we want to sort of get across. So the first question is this. In October 2024, we called the US opportunity underused. 18 months, an election, several PMs in the UK, and a shift in the economy. Is that still true, or has the sort of window changed in any way, shape, or form?
Yeah, thanks so much, Howard. Great to be back. And hopefully those of you that were here last time, good to see you again and looking forward to getting to know new people that are watching today as well. Is it underused? The short answer is yes, it still absolutely is. What we're seeing out here in the States is still crazy levels of growth. That we're looking at not just kind of wider external stats, but looking at the internal numbers that we're seeing from Lead and Gain, and our growth as a business has kind of been a bit ridiculous. That's been a combination of us being able to acquire new businesses from some of our competitors, but probably the biggest growth aspect has just been new UK-based agencies wanting to explore in the US. So I think there's kind of that external perception of what's going on in the world. There's a lot going on in the world right now, right? There's wars, there's political changes, There's that kind of bit of a downbeat feeling about business in general in the UK. And I think a lot of owners of agencies over the last couple of years have just kind of got a bit fed up with having to scrape around and trying to get their 10 to 15% and ultra competitiveness in the UK market and decided to go give the US a whirl. And in the last 18 months, nearly 2 years since we did the last webinar, the success that we've seen from these UK-based agencies has been unprecedented. Like it really has. Nobody really seems to be caring too much about what's going on in the world. They're just getting their businesses set up, cracking on with what they want to execute, and then ultimately reaping the rewards of that. So it's been great to see.
It's interesting that first stat bit we talked about how international firms have grown their staffing levels, or the staffing revenue, should I say, and taking revenue out of the US. And that's gone from 18% to 23%.
Yeah.
But the US market sales have fallen by 8.5% in 2025. And that came out of the SIA forecast, So talk to me about the pie's not growing much, but externally, people are taking more pie out of the US. You know, why do you think that is? I mean, we talked about that last time. It's been 18 months, there's been an election, there's lots of things. Why do you think suddenly from the UK and other places, why is America suddenly the golden opportunity?
I think historically, from my experience, I mean, I've been in recruitment for nearly 15 years. Before I was in the EOR space, I was a recruiter for a pretty large tech recruitment business. I started in the UK and then moved to the US over 10 years ago to build US contract divisions. So I still think it's always been that kind of golden child. I know the Middle East has grown significantly. Far East has continued to grow as well, but the US is still, I think, the number one kind of golden goose recruitment market for agencies to go after. There's no language barrier. Time difference isn't too bad. Working in a situation where you're kind of working later hours rather than earlier hours, I think it's easier for people to work in the evening than it is to work at 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning to try to be ahead of the time difference. Um, and then when you look at the actual scale of the market as well, as you mentioned, the size of the US market at the beginning it's just crazy. Like the predictions that we're seeing, thinking that the market's going to grow to about over 220 million over the next couple of 220 billion over the next couple of years. So all the forecast is there. The historical recruitment UK business core, I think the reason why UK agencies do very well over here is because it's in their DNA more. If you look at a traditional UK agency versus a traditional US agency, American agencies are very generalist. Again, this is me generally speaking, but generally speaking, in the UK, they're more specialist, they're more focused on niche markets. And so when they're able to get in with a customer out here, they kind of leech on, do a very, very good job of looking after them and being a specialist in that market. And I think that's why you see so many UK agencies do very, very well over here.
So let's sort of move that question on then, because I work with quite a lot of companies that have gone out to the States and are doing very well out in the US and working very well. But one of the first questions that I get asked for companies that aren't already working out there is, do I need a US entity before before you make a placement? And what does that actually cost an agency that gets it wrong?
Yeah, so the short answer is no. You do not need a US entity in order to start operating in the US market. It's very it can arguably be very straightforward. If you're just a perm recruiter and you only want to focus on perm, don't need a US entity. You don't need too much other than, your candidate database, your client database, start doing your BD, a bank account so that customers can pay you, which most American companies can pay into a UK bank. It really is from a high level perspective, very straightforward. There are a couple more intricacies if you're starting to look at contract recruitment, but no, you don't need a US entity in order to get going. In my opinion, there's three reasons as to why you would want to get a US entity. Number one is you will inevitably come across a customer who will at some stage say to you, "Hey Howard, can you send me your W-9, which is your business articles formation?" It means that that company has made a business decision that they will only pay and interact with other US entities. So if you don't have that, you will eventually come across that customer and you won't be able to work with them. Now, there is no timeline as to when that can happen. I know agencies that have been operating for 18 months. They've never been asked it. But I also know agencies where the first three jobs that they pulled, the customer asked it. So it really is just a lottery. The second thing is once you get a US entity set up, you can then go and purchase your own US business insurances to give you extra levels of protection. America is America. It's a very litigious place. Okay. There's a lot more lawsuits out here than there are anywhere else in the world. So, bearing that in mind, just to give yourself that extra level of protection, it does make sense at some stage to then go and get your own business insurances. Your customer's going to have insurances, the contractors will have insurances. Us at Leading Game, we have our own insurances, but you as a recruitment agency will want to have levels of protection at some stage. And that becomes a little bit more of a talking point if you're doing contract recruitment because the individual is going to be there for a longer period of time. And the third and final thing is really just my own personal opinion. What I say to agencies is get a US entity. If you're serious about doing US recruitment, you want to get serious about getting a US entity at some point. You don't need to do it from day one. You don't need to pump thousands and thousands of dollars of startup costs to get going. But once you get up and running, you get that cash flow. You may have had to skip a client because they couldn't work with you because you don't have a W-9. But once you start to get going, you're thinking, right, I'm going to really put my foot down here. I would then investigate in getting US entity set up.
So that leads me to sort of two thoughts in my head. First is, global, the EOR marketplace has exploded. It's roughly worth now about something like $6.8 billion in 2025, and it's growing by 9% every year. So can you explain EOR to those that don't really understand the OR, because then obviously the litigious side that you said there, yeah, the US is more litigious than anywhere else. In the stats that I ran down, there were some really big claims for misclassifications. So how does EOR leak into that if it does, or how do you protect yourself from that? So there's sort of two questions there.
Yeah, so EOR, employer of record. Okay. The other acronym is AOR, agent of record. So if you think about it from a UK perspective, we've got the everyone's favorite topic, IR35. Are you inside, are you outside of that? But if you think about what UK recruitment markets were like pre-IR35, you would speak to the contractor and you would say, do you have a limited company or have you got an umbrella? And it was kind of their choice. That's how it works in the States. There's no IR35, thank goodness. Okay. So there's no IR35 out here, but there are a lot of other labor laws that we need to be aware of. What we do on the EOR side is we're essentially taking care of all of your compliance for you. So you've got different onboarding types in the States. You've got a W-2, a corp to corp, an independent contractor, more commonly referred to as a 1099. We will take care of all of the paperwork and compliance on the candidate side of the deal. So, for example, if a candidate wants to be onboarded as a W-2, that means that they want to be fully employed as a contractor. We will employ them, all right? Employer of record. So they will get an employment agreement from us. They'll get an offer letter from us. We'll go through an I-9 verification check, which means that we will check with the US government that they are who they say that they are. If it's a corp to corp onboarding, we're going to check their articles of incorporation. We're going to ask for their business insurances. We're going to do good standing checks. We're going to make sure that across the states, it's not one country. It's essentially 50 different countries. So we are going to take care of a lot of those federal labor laws, state labor laws, work with the agency to make sure that they're learning and understanding what those labor laws need to be. What are the overtime rates? What are we doing about paid sick leave? So think about high level view as just everything from a compliant perspective. On the candidate side, we will take care of that burden for you so you can focus on business development, jobs, and trying to grow as best as you can.
So on the flip side of that, misclassification, that's something that really, it was a client that brought that to my attention, to be fair.
Yeah.
So that type of misclassification, how do you safeguard yourself against some of those type of things? Because that's one of the questions that have been asked quite a lot about misclassification and the penalties that come around that in certain
Yeah.
states.
Misclassification is a funny one. It is a thing. It absolutely is a thing. It absolutely is something that businesses need to be aware of. But it's not as big of a risk in reality. Okay. And in the States, there are the laws and there are the law, how those laws are then interpreted within the court system. Okay. So if you're an agency trying to stumble through US recruitment by yourself, you've never done it before, you've never got any levels of expertise or help, yes, it's going to be difficult. Okay. Again, where an employer of record that comes in that specializes in the recruitment world is they're going to help you with that compliance. So it's such a big drawn out thing. And I think a lot of agencies get really, really focused on the risk side of it. We actually put out quite a funny graphic recently. And the analogy was this. It's like the recruitment agency is like in the forest, with the magnifying glass, looking at this teeny tiny little mosquito that is misclassification, right? This tiny little bug, and really focusing in completely on that. But creeping up behind them is this huge big bear for W-2 compliance, right? So it's a bit of a funny analogy that we looked at, and it's like misclassification is a thing. It is a risk, but it's not your biggest risk. Actually, what comes with onboarding W-2s, what comes with onboarding workers the right way, state compliance laws, that's a much bigger reality. Like in my years of experience of working in the US, I can count misclassification claims pretty much on one hand. But W-2 issues, hundreds of them, hundreds of them. So that means that you want to make sure you've got experts that you're talking with, experts to understand how you will be compliant. Like, what are the questions that you need to say to the candidate? What are the answers that you need to be listening for? How do you onboard them the right way? How do you ensure that the documentation is right? The agencies that stumble into problems, they haven't done their research, they're not working with specialists, they're just trying to fit a square peg into a round hole, and that's where agencies end up getting into problems.
So let's take that then. Take us through a sort of plan, launch, operational sort of movement. Where do UK agencies actually get stuck on the planning and launch or the execution of recruitment in the US?
Yeah, I think look, everything is specific to each agency, and it does vary from company to company. But generally speaking, look, you've got to have some type of plan. I don't think there's a recruiter out there that just one day wakes up and starts calling American clients and candidates. There's got to be some type of planning behind it. So, what's your candidate market look like? What's your client market look like? Doing some research on some job market. Are there actually jobs out there? Is there actually growth out there in the market that you're looking to get into? Just some good level of planning and overview from a market strategy perspective, first of all. Then are you going to be, working remotely from the UK? Are you going to be doing US hours? Are you going to be hiring people just to exclusively focus on that? Are you just a one-person shop and you're going to be picking all the slack up by yourself? Do you want to open up an office in the States? Where do you want those offices to be? That's probably something a little bit more down the line that agencies should be focusing on. But just in the same way that you're recruiting in Milton Keynes and now all of a sudden you want to start recruiting in Leeds, you're going to do that business plan for that new market that you're going to be venturing into. Absolutely, agencies want to be looking at the planning element, defining the niche, identifying where that demand is strong, and then understanding where maybe those expectations differ between the US and UK is good to understand. There's thousands of US labor laws. Don't worry about all of them. Just get a basic understanding of a key few, and that will be a good enough element to focus on your planning stage. From a launching platform, like I think what agencies do right is not over committing. Okay. Um, the US is massive. Okay, it's absolutely massive. The amount of businesses that are out here, the amount of candidates that are out here can get very, very overwhelming. I think if the agencies are just launching into the US, then they're doing it wrong. They really should be focusing on Texas or New York or Florida or the Northeast or the East Coast. And it's much more city specific, state specific, region specific. Okay. Um, so the launching element is making sure that you are really taking that plan and actually going into it. Um, have you got your vendors ready? Now we'll touch on this a little bit more in a couple of questions time, but vendors, have you got your employer record? Have you got your invoice factoring company? Have you got your insurances in place? Have you got terms of business? Your UK terms of business are going to be irrelevant. American companies are not going to sign that anymore. So have you got a US perm agreement? Have you got your US contract agreement? Have you got your exclusivity agreement or retainer agreement? However it is that you go about doing your recruitment, making sure that when you're launching, you don't have to have all of your ducks in a row, but you want to be making sure that you've got those key elements there to be able to focus on. And then finally, actually becoming fully operational is it's really then staying dedicated and focused on that. The agencies that do well is they've taken their plan stage, they've taken their launch stage, and they don't panic if they don't start doing deals in the first couple of weeks. It can take time, right? It really can take time. So if you're confident in all the research that you've done in your planning, if you're confident in how you've gone about launching it, stick to that plan, stick to that process, and really, really dial in on your business development. It is more difficult to do BD in the US than it is in the UK, but once you get in there, you're kind of locked in, right? US companies don't really leave you as much if you look after them the right way. So making sure that you're focused in. If you start flip-flopping and going back and forth between different markets, that's where things start to get tricky for businesses.
So looking at that, then what's the difference between, say, a UK and US recruitment agency that still catches experienced recruitment agency owners off guard when they move into a new geographical area such as the US?
Yeah, it's oh wow, that could be a whole webinar in itself, really. The I think a couple points. One is just the size and scale is the first thing that stands to mind, right? I came from doing tech recruitment in the north of England, right? And then when I moved to New York, I got off the plane and I got into the office and started to look at the market, and you realize that my whole market of the whole north of England was the size of like one city, right? And I was there building a US contract division. So some agencies can just go too big too quickly. So I think the size and scale can get very overwhelming for some agencies. That links back into that kind of planning phases that we were talking about if you haven't planned it the right way. So there's that element. Then there's the US complexities, right? I don't know of any agency that's done well that's done it completely independently. They've not asked any questions, they've not asked for any help, they've not spoken to people that have gone and done it previously. They're not on any recruitment networks. They just woke up one day and cracked on. I don't know anybody that's ever done that successfully. So understanding the complexities of the US world, like the differences between IR35 and no IR35, what's misclassification, what have you got to do, what have you not going to be able to do, what are the key labor laws to understand state by state. If you're focusing on Florida, for example, there's very different state laws in Florida compared to California, right? As you can imagine, California's got a ton more labor laws that you need to be compliant with. So I think that the high level answer is just really size and scale to be aware of.
So when we go back to that sort of first question we briefed, how does an EOR actually work for an agency going into the USA? And what other vendors do they need lined up before they truly get operational and start to bill in the US?
Yeah, I think keep it. I mean, like I said earlier, if you're just doing perm recruitment, you really don't need that many vendors. From a perm perspective, you need a US perm agreement, you need a bank account that companies can pay you in. You probably already got a CRM. Maybe you're going to invest in like a Zoom info or a US job board or something like that. But it's very straightforward. Contract, you need a bit more. Okay. So Are you going to be self-funding? Have you got pretty deep pockets? Not many startups have that. So they're going to be looking like an invoice factoring company. How an invoice factoring company works is they will pay the employer of record every week so that we can payroll your contractors. They will pay you your margin every week. Very key point there. You'll get paid every week. And then they will collect from your customer, say, net 30 days, net 45 days. So you now get that cash flow coming in on a weekly basis to get contract up and running. I mean, when I was doing recruitment, I never had the thought of setting up my own business because I just thought it wasn't financially possible. Actually, it wasn't until I came into the EOR world that I realized that you've got these invoice factoring companies out there. Raise, 3R, Advanced Partners are a couple that we partner with that are brilliant businesses that specialize in the recruitment world and just kind of get recruitment. So invoice factoring is a key one. Business insurances, as I mentioned earlier, how well do you want to protect your business right out the gate? Getting a US entity, there are companies out there that can help you get set up with a US entity very, very quickly. It doesn't cost a lot, anywhere between $500 to $1,500, depending on the package that you want to spend on. That can come with a with an online bank account as well, articles of incorporation. Outside of that, that's about it. What the EORs are going to do, as I mentioned earlier, is they're going to take care of all the candidate compliance. All right. So your candidate onboarding, your candidate payroll, candidate hourly wage distribution, so federal tax contributions, local tax contributions, state tax contributions, contributing to Medicare, Medicaid, SUTA, FUTA, all of the complex payroll requirements that are involved in the US. And again, that all vary state to state as well. So trying to be able to do that by yourself would be very difficult from day one.
So if you looked at that, one of the things that the UK, again, a question I get asked an awful lot, is obviously in the UK, we've now got GDPR, so
Yeah,
where your data is held. Obviously, once you go across to the US, you're now in a completely different data dimension, let's call it. Yeah.
yeah.
What about holding data, collecting data, and receiving and sending data from the UK to the US? How does that work, and what vulnerabilities does that open up to a recruitment agency that don't understand those type of laws?
So yeah, being candid, I'm not fully up to speed on the GDPR world. Thankfully, I I moved before it really kicked in, so I can't even really use my own personal expertise. What I can say from like a lead and gain type of thing is occasionally we'll get agencies that redline our agreement and try to get GDPR language in there. Our take on it is that it's not US law, so it doesn't apply. So I can't comment on how it affects you from a UK perspective, but if you're a US entity, I'll go back to that US entity point, and you're operating through your US entity, I don't believe that you need to be overly concerned with that in the States. But I can't fully give a detailed answer about how it affects you on the UK side, unfortunately.
So I think the bigger question there is where you hold data, because obviously that's the question. Because you're getting data coming from the UK and Europe going across to America, etc. Who controls the data control from that point?
Yeah, what's the
Yeah.
terminology? It's like a processor and something else.
Yeah. So if let's say your CRM sits on Amazon Web Servers. In the
Yeah,
UK, that web server has to be either in the UK or Europe, okay,
got it.
to control the data. Obviously, if you're working in the States, if you're sending stuff across that meridian, then you've got to be aware of what the potential legalities are from holding
Right.
data and sending data across the meridian line.
Yeah. Yeah, I wish I was more clued up on it.
Okay, obviously something I need to get clued up on and have a look at
Yeah,
because
yeah,
because it is
yeah.
a
Again,
question
I
that
think
comes
the
up.
only thing I can really say is that it doesn't exist in the States. So if you're an entity or you do want to have offices out here, it's not something that you then need to comply with. That's essentially our taking it from a leading game perspective. It's like, look, we're an American business, we're in the States. Our data is held in the States, so it's not something that we need to comply with.
Okay. So here's a question then. What do you think then is the most expensive mistake you've watched a UK agency make in the US? And a lot of the mistakes that are made, are they avoidable?
Absolutely avoidable. Absolutely avoidable. Oh wow, I've seen some interesting stories in my time. I think some of the ones that stand out is going back to that planned launch operational phase. Is like they just haven't done it, right? They just haven't done it. I've had CEOs call me, hey Alec, you free for a quick call? Get on the phone with them. They're on we're doing a Teams video call. I can see the whole office in the background, 10, 15, 20 people, like serious businesses, serious sizable businesses. And they're going, hey, what market should we recruit for? I'm like, what do you mean? So, oh yeah, what market should we do in the US? I'm like, well, you're a you're like an engineering recruitment firm. I hope you're thinking about sticking to what you know and doing engineering recruitment. But it's kind of crazy how little people look into it and just look at those numbers and those stats and the size, and they're fed up with the UK and fed up with taxes and things like that. And they just want to go give the US a crack. Like, you've got to do it the right way. The biggest mistake I ever saw was just somebody trying to go too big too quickly. They open up an office, right? They open up an office right away, moved people out there, paid for visas, got invested, started hiring. And then the biggest thing that they did was they kept flip-flopping what they were recruiting for. 1 month they were a tech recruitment firm. A couple of months later, they were a life sciences recruitment firm. A couple of months later, the CEO had met his mate down at the pub and told him that oil and gas recruitment was pretty hot right now. And so he got his team to stop recruiting those previous two markets and now just focus on oil and gas. Well, lo and behold, that business no longer exists in the US, and they shut up shop. Unfortunately, had to lay everybody off and went back to just focusing on the UK. So just going too big too quickly. It is absolutely a crawl, walk, run type of process that you want to be getting into. Dip your toe in, work from the UK, have a look into the market, see if it's appetizing, see if it's appealing for you, give it a go, and then stick your head down and build from there.
So I sort of give my sort of view that I've seen quite a few people make some big expensive mistakes. One of the biggest expenses I think in the US is actually employing people in the US
Mhm.
and then trying to manage them remotely and drive them remotely.
Yeah.
What would you sort of advise an agency if they came to you and said, look, we're thinking of opening a US entity and we're thinking of actually putting US recruiters into there? What would you advise people on that front?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And this is where my own personal experience comes into it as well. Look, if you want to grow a business to 5, 10, 15, 20 plus people, and you're going to open up in another country, you have to have core culture from your existing business transplanted abroad, wherever that may be. Okay. And so that was the whole reason why I got my opportunity to move to the States, was because I was a really good recruiter in the UK, understood the core aspects of the business, understood the culture of the business, and they basically wanted to pick me up, move me to America, do exactly what I was already doing. But now, when I do one deal, it's 3 or 4 times the size of what it was in the UK. So I was working for a business that opened up multiple offices in the US. When we opened up an office in Philadelphia, on day one, there were 25 leaders from a senior consultant up to VPs that had been moved down from New York. Okay. So that culture was embedded day one in the new Philadelphia office. When the business opened up in Dallas, there was only about 4 or 5 that moved. Okay. When we opened up in Tampa, there was only about 4 or 5 that moved. So it was much more difficult to ingrain that culture that we built from New York or London into these newer offices. So if you are going to invest in the States and you want to employ people, I would absolutely say, whether that's yourself going to be moving or whether that's a trusted individual in your business that you can lean on and that you've got that relationship with. I do see a number of agencies that will go spend big rec to rec fees. They will pay $150,000 base salaries, close to maybe $200,000 base salaries on a VP of whatever contract perm, giving them big commission packets, big bonus packets, and it just doesn't work out because that individual just doesn't have that base connector to HQ. So absolutely transplant if you have the ability to do so. It's what I see as far more successful. far more successful.
So if you were then running a £2 million, say, GP UK recruitment agency today, and you wanted to go into the States, or you were already operating in the UK in the States, what would you do differently to stop that happening? Cultural misalignment, etc., employing the wrong people, because that's what make agencies fail. So what would you do differently?
Um, you mean what would I do differently compared
Yeah,
to the
because
ones
you've
that do
gone through
fail?
that process. You've gone to the US. You've seen companies do that and succeed. You've seen
Yeah.
companies fail. So what would you do differently?
So I think I'll rather than answer it in a way of like what would I do differently, it's focus. I would do what the successful agencies are doing. Okay, so I'll answer it kind of on the more of a positive note, which is the agencies that do well. They've got a very good market understanding of what they're going to be recruiting for. Scoped out the candidates, scoped out the clients, scoped out the jobs. Okay. The next big thing is they've built an incredible business development culture. I can see a huge gap between two different agencies. I'm speaking to agencies every single day. The ones that have a good business development culture, yeah, I get a very good feeling that these guys are going to be doing a lot of business. The ones that are like, oh yeah, the market's a bit slow, or we're trying to build this app that we're putting together, right? It's like you just need to get on the phones. You need to be doing simple, straightforward recruitment. The big mistake that I made was I had left London as an experienced recruiter. So the way that I went about recruiting was a little bit differently from how I started. I remember coming to New York and my director pulling me into a meeting room after a couple of weeks. He's like, "What are you doing?" I was like, "Oh, well, there's this event coming up. I'm going to go to this user group. I'm going to try and meet these people," because that's what I was doing when I left London. He's like, "Well, you didn't start doing that in London." He's like, "What did you do when you started?" I was like, "Just called candidates and clients, did lead generation, did business development." He's like, "That's what you got to be focusing on." So keeping it simple is what the businesses that do well do very, very well, should I say. So I would make sure that you go about it that way. The culture aspect, as we mentioned, that planning phase, that launching phase, work with experts in the field. Like there's vendors everywhere, right? There's vendors absolutely everywhere. It doesn't matter whether it's from invoice factoring, banking, insurance. But any vendor that you end up choosing, my advice is always go with the vendors that are recruitment specific. Okay. I talk to my boss all the time. I'm like, oh, they just get it, right? They just get it. And that is such a powerful thing, an advantage to an agency. Because if you're dealing with an invoice factoring company that is just purely about numbers, right? It's just a banking element, they don't care. If you're dealing with an invoice factoring company where the client's paying a little bit late, they get the intricacies of the recruitment world, right? So you get that flexibility, whether it's with an EOR or an agent of record, whatever it might be. The businesses that get recruitment are the ones that end up giving you a leg up and make you more successful.
It's interesting. You talk about vendors, you talk about things that happen with vendors, and I see this happen an awful lot in the UK. And so this is the last question that really to help people move across. I see this happen all the time, and it happens to me because I'm the one giving the advice and advising people of what to do, etc. So, what's one piece of advice that Lead and Gain and yourselves give out that every client then tends to ignore and then comes back to you 6 months later and says, actually, how do I go back and do that? Because it's now bit me in the derriere.
Wow, it's amazing. It's amazing what information that we can give to an agency that goes in one ear and out the other, right? The US is complicated. The laws are complicated. The state laws vary. The taxes vary. So when you're being given a new piece of information, you've got to be able to retain maybe not all that information, but a good portion of that information to try to learn from it. Okay. So again, you can see a clear difference between the agencies that not just are learning the information that we give them, but also want to learn because they can now use that on their own candidate qualification. I'll give you an example. Insurance requirements. When you're working with a corp-to-corp contractor, somebody that's set up an LLC or a limited company, they are responsible for purchasing their own business insurances. All they need is general liability and professional liability. It's very, very straightforward. They need to have those insurances in order to be onboarded with us. The amount of agencies that I see that don't ask the question during the recruitment process about whether that candidate has insurances is quite baffling. And it's always hilarious, the ones that just continue to not answer. Because what happens is the deal now goes through, the recruitment process goes through, the candidate gets offered the job, they now get the onboarding, and we reach out to them and go, oh, please send us your business insurances, please. And they go, what are you talking about? I don't have any insurances. And then they go and do their research and they've got to spend X hundreds of dollars in purchasing insurances. And now there ends up being a whole new candidate rate negotiation. The candidate didn't know that they need to go and purchase these insurances. So they're going back to the recruiter and going, I'm not going to take this job unless you give me more money. And now the recruiter's losing their mind because they think the deal is about to be falling through. Whereas that could have been plugged if 2 weeks previously, on the very first candidate qualification, they'd have gone, how do you want to be onboarded? Corp to corp. Do you have an active limited company? Yes. Do you have business insurances? Do you have your general liability and your professional liability insurances? Do you have a certificate of insurance that you can email? Yes. Great. That's pretty much all that needed to be done. And so the agencies that do well, they learn about those intricacies operating out here, and then they make sure they embed that into their recruitment process. And all of their recruiters know it, and everybody understands it. I made a huge mistake when I was working with a candidate. I just assumed that they wanted to be onboarded as a corp to corp. Okay. And actually, they wanted to be onboarded as a W-2. And that's completely different. And the cost elements are different as well. And guess what? It completely ate into my margin, and my margin disappeared. And my manager yelled at me, and I never made that mistake again.
So it's simple. It sounds very much like the UK, understand the difference between limited W2, etc., to make sure that you're doing the right things. Make
Yeah.
sure you are covering, everything before you put that deal through.
Yeah.
Because, again, as we said at the beginning, the US is such a litigious area
Mhm.
and they will come and bite you because
Yeah.
they feel it's the right thing to do. It's been a really interesting view. You know, I remember having the conversation 18 months ago about, is it the golden opportunity? And it still sounds like there's a massive opportunity in the US, but
Mhm.
it is about getting everything correct. It is about doing it properly. It's not just about thinking one day, put my finger in the air, yeah, I can go in the US and I can make twice the fees, etc. There's a lot of things to do behind that to make
Yeah.
sure that you are successful. And the thing that I keep saying to the UK clients that I've got is the same thing. Whatever time you think it's going to take you to A, first of all, make a placement,
Mhm.
B, start to break even monthly, and C, get your investment back, probably double it
Mhm.
because the market has changed. And people still sort of think about that. But I always say that in the UK, what we're doing at the moment in the UK is that the average time to make a placement in the UK has gone from 4 weeks, 4 point something weeks, probably, 2022, 2023. It's now at 8.6 weeks.
Wow.
So we have got a double amount of time to recruit, but we're expecting the same revenue streams to come through in the same speed because we're
Yeah.
expecting it to come through in 4 weeks when it's now taking 8 weeks to get through that marketplace.
Yeah.
And clients and candidates are now taking more and more time. We had quiet quitting where everyone was just leaving. We've now got quiet staying where people are going out to agencies, getting jobs, but then staying. They're using that as a leverage to stay. And I think that's again from what I'm be speaking to the guys in the States, we're seeing that as well in the States. There's a lot of people sort of not for fearful of moving, but not moving as much. So I think it is about understanding your market, understanding your rate, and working from there. So anything that you want to leave the people with that have attended today that either Lead and Gain can help with or an offer that you can offer out to people to say, if you want to come and talk to us, etc., this is what we can offer.
Yeah, absolutely. If you're thinking about doing it, I mean, even that, I have conversations with people that are just thinking about doing it, and we can jump into things a bit more detail. I'll leave you with 2 points. One is I did some analysis on average spend with us from May to June. Okay. The agencies that were growing, the average growth in spend, so that means that they're ultimately onboarding more contractors. Okay, so they're doing more deals. So their fees have gone up with us. So between May to June, the average growth was at 60% month on month. Okay. I looked at the bottom half of the agencies and the average decline was 7%. Okay. So that implied to me that even the agencies that weren't doing great were essentially kind of flatlining, just stalling. It wasn't declining by 60%. It was staying about even. But the ones that nailed it, the ones that were doing well, were seeing 60% growth. Okay, month on month. And then the final point is lots of confusing elements. But the biggest thing to understand about the US is that recruitment is still recruitment. A candidate conversation is still a candidate conversation, and a client conversation is still a client conversation. And that was a huge piece of advice that was given to me. And once I kind of put that in the forefront of my mind, my career in the US really, really kicked on. It's still exactly the same of recruitment conversations. There's nothing different. And so if you're good at recruiting in the UK or Europe, you can absolutely be very, very good at recruiting in the US as well.
It's a really good point. And I think what I've found with the clients I've helped open up into the States or have already been in the States is that their recruitment mentality, because we are the most competitive recruitment market in the world, you
Mhm.
know, far outperforms the US mentality when it comes to, finding candidates quickly, putting candidates across quickly. So I think there's a lot to be said there. Alex, as always, very insightful. Thank you very much. Much appreciated. Ladies and gentlemen, thanks for your time. Next, we've got a really interesting conversation. We know we've had 30 months plus of falling perm numbers. Okay. So the question we're going to pose next week is your business built to survive it as the market starts to recover? Will you survive that from there, from a perm point of view or a contract point of view? So there's lots to go on. Alex, again, thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, thanks for your time. And we look
Thanks,
forward to
Alex.
seeing you all next week. Thank you very much. Cheers.
Bye, bro.
Bye.